in reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Chair, H.R. 626 sends the wrong message at the wrong time to working American taxpayers and families that are struggling in difficult times. Our economy is in crisis, and deficits are already soaring. Excess government spending created record deficits and have continued to rise for years, in good times and bad, meaning government already spends too much of the taxpayers' money and has been running deficits before and now during the Obama administration. But more than that, jobs are being lost. In the time since the last time this bill was considered and not passed into law, 4.3 million Americans have lost their jobs, while 36,000 net new federal jobs have been created. My voters, my taxpayers, my constituents are suffering. So are yours, Madam Speaker. So are the people on the other side. But in fact, there's no suffering in Washington. We have some of the lowest unemployment. We have a growing quality of life. And even home prices are not falling very much here. It's not a surprise. Why? Salaries are not falling here. Those of us who will speak here today are making nearly $170,000 a year. And many of our staff, a great many of our staff, make over $100,000 a year, as do a great many of the federal workforce. This bill does not have one provision to say if you make $170,000 a year, why do we have to give you this benefit? Because you have to choose between feeding your children and being with your children? Certainly not. There are no protections against, in fact, those who do not need this special benefit getting it. There are no safeguards at all. As a matter of fact, this bill envisions the $1 billion over 5 years, or more than $2 billion over 10 years, swelling to $4 billion over 10 years or more, because, in fact, it believes this should be 8 weeks of special leave. Now, in the Rules Committee, I was told that I just didn't understand that Germany gives a year when you have a child. Well, you know, the amazing thing is Germany and France and many of these countries are now going the opposite direction because they recognize that they were losing competitiveness and that these generous benefits, although good to have, were unsustainable. And they're particularly unsustainable when the only people that can afford it are those of us who live off the taxpayers', I'd like to say generosity, but in fact it's not generosity. This money is taken involuntarily and spent at the whims of Congress. Madam Speaker, federal employees enjoy one of the highest levels of job security, without a doubt, anywhere in the United States. I would venture to say many of them the highest. More importantly, in good times and bad, they keep their jobs. Even if you look at the protections against being arbitrarily let go or hired at will, that's not even the point. The point is, in a bad time, when tens of thousands of auto workers are being laid off, when 40,000 employees of Chrysler dealerships have just gotten from this administration a 26-day pink notice to go because their franchises have been taken arbitrarily, at that time we've grown the federal government by 36,000, and we're looking at a new benefit that could easily cost $4 billion over the next 10 years. Now, this bill was scored at nearly $1 billion over 5 years. But, of course, that's only if it remains at 4 weeks. And let's talk about those 4 weeks. This bill is not 4 weeks. This is 12 weeks. Most federal workers, when they retire, have a significant amount of accrued, even when they leave in general, accrued sick leave. And you might ask why. Well, because the typical sick leave for federal workers is 13 days a year. That's nearly 3 weeks a year you get to be sick, on top of 20, depending upon your seniority, 20 to 26 days a year of vacation. So you're looking at 5 weeks of vacation. On top of that, you're looking at nearly 3 weeks of sick leave. And we're being told by the majority that they can't make those trade-offs to use some of that when a child is born. It's a joyous occasion when a child is born. It's an important occasion when a child is adopted. It's sometimes a critical time when a foster child, battered, beaten, or simply unloved, is brought into the home. The minority has no question at all but the importance of this. It's been a long time since 1993. This is well established to be something in which people make the sacrifices without sacrificing their jobs. And we certainly have no objection to the current practice, which is common throughout the federal workforce, to allow employees to take some or all of their sick leave. As a matter of fact, an amendment which has been ruled in order and will be considered tonight calls for employees, federal employees, to be not only able to use all of their accrued sick leave, but to borrow against future sick leave. So if they want to take the whole 12 weeks and every single day receive a full paycheck, we're willing to meet the majority more than halfway. We're willing to make the kind of compromise the American people would like us to make with the majority. It doesn't mean that this is the ideal solution. There are safeguards that are not in this legislation that we'd like to see, and we will work with the Senate to see if we can't get that. But, in fact, we offer an amendment that would at least cause there to be no net new cost to the American people. And I know that the majority will come back and say this is pay-go neutral. Well, pay-go is a wonderful term, but let's understand. If you create additional days, the federal workforce will be off. You can only have one of two choices. Either their labor wasn't needed and as a result doesn't need to be replaced, or their labor was needed and will be replaced. Replacement costs money. That ultimately will lead to a higher cost. I believe CBO's scoring of approximately $1 billion over 5 years is in fact low. But I'm not going to argue with it. We accept theirs because they are in fact a neutral arbiter of these differences about what something is cost or is worth. So here the Republicans are going to offer to support codifying what many agencies are already doing in the federal government, but not without the American people understanding that if we add a new additional off-time benefit of 4 or 8 additional weeks on top of the 5 weeks and nearly 3 weeks that are already granted to most federal employees, I think the American people, rightfully so, will send us packing. They'll send us packing because we would be so out of touch, so inconsistent with what the small mom and pop and the not so small companies in America are experiencing. Earlier, Madam Speaker, I said that 4,353,000 net jobs have been lost during the time between the last time this bill was considered. That's not the true story. The true story is reflected in the state tax revenues and now in the federal tax revenues, where we realize it's not just those who lost their jobs, it's those who lost a great percentage of the earnings they were making on their jobs. Overtime is gone. And in fact, profits, profit sharing, and additional commissions are generally gone. As a result, people aren't just out of work, but people who were still technically fully employed may be making less than half of what they were making just a year or two ago. So, Madam Speaker, we on this side of the aisle will oppose the bill in its current form, but not without offering viable alternatives, reasonable amendments, some ruled, some not ruled in order, so that we can make this at least a bill that America can understand why we would consider doing it at a time in which so many Americans are suffering. With that, I reserve